With just 4 whispered words, a child shattered the illusion of a billionaire's perfect life. In the glittering heart of New York City, inside a hotel where wealth feels untouchable, a maid's 12-year-old daughter noticed something no one else did. He was handsome, charming, and always by the billionaire's side. Yet his touch lingered too long. His smile never reached his eyes. Then came the whisper. A single sentence, spoken in a nearly extinct Chinese dialect the girl should never have known. For words that stopped one of the richest women in the world in her tracks. He's not who he says he is. From that moment, trust unraveled, and the walls of power began to shake. But who exactly was this man? And how could a child know the truth? A whisper in a language she shouldn't know would change everything. A 12-year-old girl with blonde hair saw what no one else did. The man holding the billionaire's arm was a monster in a tailored suit. The Grand Majestic Hotel was a palace of modern glass and steel. It rose from the heart of the city like a spire of impossible wealth. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of money. Bellhops with perfect posture glided across marble floors. The scent of imported lilies, faint and expensive, hung in the air. For Laura, a maid, this world was a place she cleaned but never truly entered. Her life was a different scent. Antiseptic hospital corridors and the stale, worried air of a sick room. Every morning, she left her mother's bedside to come here. The fear of the mounting medical bills was a constant, cold knot in her stomach. Her mother's cancer was a thief, stealing their savings, their peace, and their future. Her daughter, Evelyn, was 12. She had hair the color of pale corn silk and eyes the color of a summer sky. But in those eyes was a knowing, a depth that startled people. She looked at the world and saw things others missed. Details, patterns, the little lies people told with their hands and their smiles. Today, Evelyn was with her mother. The after-school program was closed for a staff meeting, so she sat quietly in a corner of the hotel's opulent lobby, a worn copy of a history book open on her lap. She wasn't really reading. She was watching. The lobby was a theater, and the guests were the actors. A businessman barked into his phone, his face a mask of stress. A young couple, giddy with new love, laughed as they checked in. And then, the main performance began. Mrs. Eleanor Chen entered through the revolving doors. She was a woman who did not just walk into a room. She took possession of it. She was in her late 60s, her black hair streaked with elegant silver. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk that shimmered as she moved. Her face was a study in dignified composure, but her eyes held a hint of loneliness. On her arm was a man. He was American, handsome in that effortless, confident way that seemed to be a birthright for some. His name was Gregory Dalton. He had a smile that could charm a bird from a tree and a voice as smooth as aged whiskey. He treated Mrs. Chun with a reverence that was almost theatrical, his hand hovering near the small of her back, his head inclined to listen to her every word. The hotel manager, a man with a perpetually anxious expression, hurried to greet them. Mrs. Chun, Mr. Dalton. Welcome. Your suite is ready. The penthouse, of course. Thank you, Robert, Gregory said, his smile including the manager in a warm, exclusive circle. Eleanor deserves only the best. Mrs. Chun gave a small, reserved smile. But Evelyn saw it. A flicker of something in the billionaire's eyes. A weariness, as if she were playing a part she had grown tired of. Laura, pushing her housekeeping cart near the grand staircase, paused to watch them. She nudged Evelyn. See them? She's one of the richest women in the world. And him, he looks like a movie star. Evelyn didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on Gregory Dalton. She watched the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. She saw the way his fingers, for a fraction of a second, tightened on Mrs. Chen's arm, more like a claim than a caress. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible way he guided her, steering her like a precious, fragile object. Later, as Laura cleaned a room on the penthouse floor, Evelyn sat on a stool in the hallway, supposedly doing her homework. The door to Mrs. Chen's suite was ajar. Gregory Dalton was on the phone by the window, his back to the door. He was speaking in a low, urgent tone. The timeline is accelerating, he said. She's more trusting than I expected. Yes, the final papers are being drawn up by my lawyers. It will all be transferred soon. No, she suspects nothing. She's lonely, desperate for a connection. It's almost too easy. He laughed, a sound that was nothing like his charming public laugh. This one was cold and sharp, like breaking glass. Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had seen him before. Not him, exactly, but men like him. In the history books she devoured. Men who came with smiles and promises, but whose hearts were full of greed. Men who preyed on the vulnerable. Her grandfather, a war hero whose faded photograph sat on her bedside table, had taught her about such men. The most dangerous enemy, he used to say, is the one who makes you believe he is your friend. He had been a codebreaker during the war, a man who saw patterns in chaos. He had taught Evelyn to see them, too. To listen not just to what people said, but to what they didn't say. Gregory Dalton finished his call and turned. He saw Evelyn sitting in the hallway. His face, which had been hard and cruel a moment before, instantly transformed. The charming smile returned. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice warm honey. "Shouldn't you be in school?" "It's a half day," Evelyn replied, her voice small, her eyes never leaving his. "A bright young lady like you should be enjoying the afternoon, not stuck in a hotel hallway," he said, pulling a crisp $50 bill from his wallet. "Here, go buy yourself some ice cream." Evelyn looked at the money, then back at his face. She didn't take it. "No, thank you, sir." Gregory's smile faltered for a heartbeat. Annoyance flickered in his eyes before he masked it. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug, turning back into the suite. Evelyn knew she had to do something. Her mother's face, etched with worry over the hospital bills, flashed in her mind. They were powerless people, cogs in the giant, glittering machine of the hotel. What could a 12-year-old girl and her mother do? But then she thought of her grandfather. He had faced down entire armies with nothing but his mind. He had taught her that courage wasn't about being strong. It was about doing the right thing, especially when you were scared. Mrs. Chun came out of the suite a few minutes later, alone. She was heading towards the elevator. It was now or never. Evelyn stood up and walked towards the billionaire. She kept her head down, as if she were just a child walking down a hallway. As she passed Mrs. Chun, she looked up. Their eyes met. In that moment, Evelyn did something extraordinary, something impossible. She spoke, not in English, but in a rare, almost forgotten dialect of Chinese. A dialect from a small, mountainous region where Mrs. Chun had been born. A dialect she hadn't heard in over 50 years. Evelyn said, her pronunciation perfect, her tone low and urgent. "He's not who he says he is." Mrs. Chun stopped dead. The blood drained from her face. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. She stared at the little blonde girl, her mouth slightly agape. It wasn't just the words. It was the dialect. A secret key to a life she had left behind long ago. A language she had spoken only with her family, all of whom were gone. "You. How can you speak?" she stammered, her voice a choked whisper. Evelyn looked her directly in the eye and spoke again, her voice clear and steady, still in that nearly extinct dialect. "He will take everything from you. Trust me." Then, before the shocked woman could say another word, Evelyn turned and walked away, disappearing down the long, silent corridor, leaving the billionaire standing alone, her world suddenly, terrifyingly, tilted on its axis. Mrs. Chen's face, a moment ago a mask of placid wealth, was now pale with a fear she hadn't felt in decades. The little girl's warning echoed in the silent, opulent hallway, a seed of terrible doubt planted in the heart of the gilded cage. Eleanor Chen stood frozen in the hallway. The plush carpet seemed to sway beneath her feet. The air, conditioned to a perfect temperature, suddenly felt cold and thin. Around her, the life of the hotel continued. A distant bell chimed. A guest laughed. But for Eleanor, the world had gone silent. All she could hear were the echoes of that little girl's words, spoken in a ghost's tongue. "He's not who he says he is." The dialect was a key to a locked room in her memory, a room she had not entered for 60 years. It was the language of her childhood, of a small village nestled in the misty mountains of Hunan province. It was the language of her mother, her father, her brothers. All gone now, swallowed by war and revolution. She had escaped. She had built a new life, an empire of steel and finance, in a new country. She had buried the past under layers of success and tailored silk. How could a blonde American child speak those words? It was impossible. A trick. A cruel, elaborate joke. But the look in the girl's eyes, there was no malice in them. Only a strange, solemn urgency. Gregory Dalton emerged from the suite. His smile was back in place, a perfect, polished mask. "Darling, I've ordered us some champagne to celebrate. The deal is all but finalized." He reached for her arm. This time, his touch felt different. It was not the comforting gesture of a lover. It was the grip of a jailer. Eleanor flinched, pulling her arm away. "What is it?" Gregory's smile tightened at the edges. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." I need some air," Eleanor said, her voice unsteady. She turned and walked towards the elevator, her movements stiff. She could feel his eyes on her back, questioning, suspicious. Down in the lobby, she approached the front desk. Robert, the anxious manager, rushed over. "Mrs. Chun, is everything to your liking?" "There was a little girl," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice even. "Blonde hair. About 12 years old. She was in the hallway on the penthouse floor. Her mother is a maid here. I need to find her." The manager's face clouded with professional concern. "A child on the guest floors? That is highly irregular. I assure you, our staff is trained too." "I don't care about your training," Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp with an authority she rarely used. "Find her. Now." The manager scurried away, speaking into his walkie-talkie in hushed, frantic tones. Eleanor waited, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She scanned the faces in the lobby, half expecting to see the girl's piercing blue eyes watching her from the crowd. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless break room in the hotel's basement, Laura was counting her tips. The small pile of bills was a pathetic shield against the mountain of debt that awaited her. She felt a familiar wave of despair wash over her. Evelyn sat beside her, quietly reading her history book. She seemed calm, but her leg bounced slightly, the only sign of her inner turmoil. "What did you say to that woman, Evie?" Laura asked, her voice low. "I saw you. You worried her." "I told her the truth," Evelyn said simply, not looking up from her book. "The truth? What truth? You don't know those people." Laura's voice was laced with fear. "You can't go around upsetting guests. Especially not guests like Mrs. Chun. We could be fired. Do you understand? Fired. He's a bad man, Mom." "You don't know that," Laura whispered, her eyes darting towards the door. "He's rich. He's powerful. People like us, we stay out of their way. We keep our heads down. That's how we survive." The door to the break room burst open. The hotel manager stood there, flanked by 2 burly security guards. His face was red and flustered. "Laura," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "What has your daughter done?" Laura's heart leaped into her throat. I don't know what you mean." "Mrs. Chun is demanding to see the child. She says your daughter spoke to her. Upset her. This is a complete breach of protocol. Get your things. You're both to leave. Immediately." Tears welled in Laura's eyes. It was happening. Her worst fear realized. Fired. No job. No way to pay for her mother's treatment. It was a death sentence. "Please, sir. She's just a child. She didn't mean any harm." "I don't care what she meant," the manager snapped. "You're a liability." "Wait." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Everyone turned. Eleanor Chin stood in the doorway. Behind her, Gregory Dalton watched, his arms crossed, a look of cold curiosity on his face. Eleanor walked into the small, cramped break room. The scent of lilies and expensive perfume seemed out of place in the room's humble shabbiness. She ignored the manager, the guards, and Laura. Her eyes were fixed on Evelyn. She knelt down, so she was at eye level with the child. The emerald silk of her dress pooled on the dusty linoleum floor. "How did you know?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft. She spoke in English now. "How did you know my language?" Evelyn closed her book. She looked at the billionaire, then glanced at Gregory, who was watching them with a hawk's intensity. "My grandfather taught me," she said. "Your grandfather?" "He was a soldier. A long time ago. He was stationed in China during the war." A flicker of recognition sparked in Eleanor's memory. American soldiers. A few had passed through her village. Kind young men who gave the children chewing gum and chocolate. It seemed a lifetime ago. "What was his name?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. "His name was Sergeant Michael Peterson," Evelyn said. "But the people in the village he protected, they gave him a Chinese name. They called him the Silent Guardian." Eleanor gasped. It was as if the floor had dropped out from under her. The Silent Guardian. A name she had not heard since she was a little girl. He was a local legend. An American soldier who had learned their dialect. A man who had single-handedly held off a platoon of invading soldiers. saving her village from a massacre. Her own father had fought alongside him. The Silent Guardian had been their friend, their protector. He had disappeared after the war, and they never knew what became of him. She stared at Evelyn. The blonde hair, the blue eyes, Michael Peterson's eyes. It was impossible. And yet, he saved my family. Eleanor whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He saved my whole village. Gregory stepped forward, his charming demeanor gone. His face was a thundercloud. Eleanor, what is this nonsense? It's a shakedown. The maid put her daughter up to it. They want money. No, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. She stood up, her back straight, her eyes blazing. She turned to face him. She spoke to me in a language you could never understand, Gregory. In more ways than one. She turned back to Evelyn. Your grandfather. Is he still alive? Evelyn shook her head slowly. He passed away 2 years ago. My grandma is sick. That's why my mom works so hard. The pieces clicked into place. The maid's desperation. The child's strange wisdom. The impossible connection to her own buried past. It was all a tapestry, intricate and undeniable. The warning from the Silent Guardian's granddaughter could not be a coincidence. Robert, Eleanor said to the manager, her voice ringing with the command that had built an empire. This woman and her child are now my personal guests. You will arrange for them to have a suite on my floor. You will see to their every need. And you will triple her salary. Effective immediately. This will be her compensation for the distress you have caused her. The manager's jaw dropped. The security guards looked at each other in confusion. Laura stared, wide-eyed, unable to process what was happening. Gregory's face was a mask of fury. Eleanor, you can't be serious. You're going to listen to a child's fantasy. It is more real than anything you have ever told me. Eleanor said, her voice like ice. She turned her back on him, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. She extended her hand to Evelyn. Come, she said gently. You and I have much to talk about. You must tell me everything you know about your grandfather, and everything you know about him. She nodded towards Gregory, who stood frozen in a state of impotent rage, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. The little girl had done more than just whisper a warning. She had lit a fuse. The suite was not just a room. It was a different world. It occupied a corner of the penthouse floor, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking panorama of the city. The furniture was elegant and understated, the colors muted creams and soft grays. A grand piano stood in one corner, its polished surface reflecting the sky. For Laura, who had spent years cleaning rooms like this, to suddenly be a guest within one felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. She walked through the suite, touching the smooth, cool surfaces of the marble countertops in the kitchenette, the soft cashmere of a throw blanket on the sofa. It felt wrong, like a trespass. Fear, a cold and familiar companion, still clung to her. This couldn't be real. There would be a price to pay. People like them didn't get rescued. They got used. Evelyn, however, was unfazed. She found a comfortable armchair by the window, curled up with her history book, and began to read as if she had lived in such luxury her entire life. Her calmness was both a comfort and a mystery to her mother. A quiet knock came at the door. Laura opened it to find Eleanor Chun. The billionaire had changed from her silk dress into a simple but exquisitely tailored pair of cream-colored trousers and a matching cashmere sweater. She looked less like an empress and more like a grandmother. In her hands, she held a silver tray with a steaming teapot and 3 delicate porcelain cups. I thought we might talk, Eleanor said, her voice gentle. And I find that conversation is always better with a good cup of jasmine tea. She set the tray down on the coffee table. The fragrant steam filled the room. Laura hovered nervously by the door, unsure of what to do. Eleanor gestured to the sofa opposite her. Please, Laura. Sit. You are my guest. Hesitantly, Laura sat on the edge of the plush cushion. Eleanor poured the tea, her movements graceful and precise. She handed a cup to Laura, then to Evelyn. Evelyn, Eleanor began, her eyes full of a sorrowful curiosity. Tell me about your grandfather. Tell me everything. Evelyn put her book aside. She looked at the old woman, her blue eyes clear and direct. Grandpa didn't talk much about the war, she said. He said it wasn't something to be proud of. But he talked about the people. He said the people in the village were the bravest he had ever met. They had lost so much, but they still knew how to be kind. She took a sip of her tea. He taught me how to see things. He said most people only look at the surface, at the nice clothes and the big smiles. But the truth is underneath. He taught me to watch their hands, to listen to the spaces between their words. He said that's where the lies hide. Eleanor listened, captivated. It was as if she were hearing Michael Peterson's voice again, the quiet wisdom of the young soldier who had seen too much. "And what did you see when you looked at Mr. Dalton?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw a hunter," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "He smiles, but his eyes are always watching, looking for a weakness. When he touches you, it's not to be kind. It's to hold on, like a leash. He talks about the future, but his mind is only on the present, on what he can get right now. Grandpa said men like that are empty inside, and they try to fill the emptiness by taking things from other people." Laura stared at her daughter, stunned into silence. Where did she learn such things? How could she see so clearly what all the other adults, including a brilliant businesswoman like Mrs. Chun, had missed? Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Evelyn's words were a cold, clear light, illuminating all the small, nagging doubts she had pushed aside. Gregory's constant talk of merging their assets for simplicity, his insistence on using his own lawyers, who were more familiar with international finance, his subtle isolation of her from her old friends and advisors, framing it as a way to protect her from their jealousy. It had all been done with such charm, such plausible deniability. She had wanted to believe him. She had been so lonely. She opened her eyes, the gentle warmth gone, replaced by the cool, decisive resolve that had built her fortune. She picked up her phone from the table. She dialed a number from memory. "David," she said when the call was answered. There were no pleasantries. "I have a situation. It requires the utmost discretion." David was her head of security, a man who had been with her for 30 years, a former intelligence officer whose loyalty was absolute. "I need a complete workup on a man named Gregory Dalton. American, in his late 40s. I want everything. Financial records, travel history, known associates, past relationships. I want to know who he had coffee with yesterday and what brand he drank. I want to know if he has any debts, any secrets, any other names. I want it yesterday, David." She listened for a moment. "The urgency is extreme. My personal security is potentially compromised. Spare no expense. Use all our resources. And David, be careful. I have a feeling he is more dangerous than he appears." She ended the call and placed the phone back on the table with a soft click. The action was quiet, but it felt as momentous as a declaration of war. She had turned the vast, powerful machinery of her empire against the man she had almost married. As if on cue, the intercom buzzed. Laura jumped. Eleanor answered it calmly. It was the front desk. Mr. Dalton was in the lobby, demanding to see her. "Tell Mr. Dalton that I am not to be disturbed," Eleanor said, her voice cold steel. "Under any circumstances. He is not to be allowed on this floor. If he persists, you are to escort him from the premises. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence from the other end before a stammered, "Yes, Mrs. Chun." A few minutes later, the phone in the suite rang. Eleanor glanced at the caller ID and let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again and again. The persistent, angry sound was a stark reminder of the danger that was now circling, shut out for the moment, but not gone. When the ringing finally stopped, an unnerving silence filled the room. The three of them sat there, a strange, impromptu family forged in a moment of crisis. The lonely billionaire, the terrified maid, and the preternaturally wise child. Eleanor looked at Laura, whose face was pale with fear. She saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the fine lines of worry etched around her mouth. She recognized that look. It was the same look her own mother had worn decades ago, as she struggled to feed her children in a war-torn village. "Laura," Eleanor said, her voice softening again. "I know you are frightened, but you and your daughter are under my protection now. No one will harm you. I give you my word." She paused, then added, "Evelyn told me your mother is ill. I would like to help. My personal physician is one of the best oncologists in the world. I will have him review her case immediately. We will have her moved to a private hospital, the best there is. You will not have to worry about the cost. You will only have to worry about her getting well." Laura burst into tears. It was not a quiet, dignified weeping. It was a storm of pent-up fear, grief, and now, overwhelming gratitude. She sobbed into her hands, the sound raw and heartbreaking. All the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the crushing weight of the bills, it all came pouring out. Evelyn slid off her chair and went to her mother, wrapping her small arms around her. Eleanor came and sat beside them, placing a comforting hand on Laura's shaking shoulder. In that moment, in the opulent suite high above the city, the three women were not separated by wealth or class. They were bound by a shared vulnerability, a shared history they were only just beginning to understand, and a shared enemy whose true face was about to be revealed. The gilded cage had opened, not as an escape, but as a fortress, and from within its walls, they would prepare for the coming fight. The next 24 hours were a blur of disorienting change for Laura. One moment, she was an invisible maid, scrubbing toilets and living in constant fear of a pink slip. The next, she was residing in a suite that cost more per night than she earned in a month. Her mother was being transferred by private ambulance to a state-of-the-art medical facility, and her daughter was having quiet, serious conversations with one of the most powerful women in the world. It felt like she had stepped through a looking glass. For Gregory Dalton, the 24 hours were a descent into a cold, seething fury. First, his calls went unanswered. Then, his key card to the penthouse floor was deactivated. When he tried to approach the elevator, a polite but immovable security guard informed him that Mrs. Chun was unavailable. His charm, the primary tool of his trade, was useless against this silent, impenetrable wall. He retreated to a bar across the street from the hotel, a dark, wood-paneled room where he could watch the building's entrance. He ordered a whiskey and drank it in one swallow, the liquid burning a trail down his throat. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The old woman had been a perfect mark, lonely, trusting, and so insulated by her wealth that she had lost her natural sense of suspicion. The final transfer of a significant portion of her liquid assets into a joint holding company under his control was scheduled for the end of the week. He had been days away from the biggest score of his life, and it had all been undone by a child, a little blonde brat, and her meddling mother. It was inconceivable. He slammed the empty glass on the bar, drawing a sharp look from the bartender. He needed to get back in, to regain control of the narrative. He would apologize, grovel if he had to. He would invent a story, a sudden illness in his family, a momentary lapse in judgment. He would turn on the charm, the practiced sincerity that had never failed him. He just needed to get in front of her. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. She knows. Get out. A cold dread, colder than the ice in his next drink, seeped into his bones. Who was this? One of his contacts on the hotel staff? It didn't matter. If Eleanor knew, truly knew, then this was no longer a game of seduction. It was a game of survival. His entire operation was built on a foundation of meticulously crafted lies. His name, his history, his wealth, all of it was an illusion. If she had started digging, the whole house of cards would come tumbling down. He looked up at the hotel, no longer a symbol of his imminent victory, but a fortress he had been cast out of. His anger curdled into something much more dangerous, desperation. Up in the penthouse suite, the report from David, Eleanor's head of security, was being projected onto a large screen. It was a portrait of a life lived in the shadows. Gregory Dalton did not exist. His real name was Jonathan Hemlock. He was not a retired investment banker. He was a career criminal. The report showed a string of wealthy widows and divorcees across the country, each one charmed, romanced, and then systematically defrauded. He would drain their accounts, leverage their assets, and disappear, leaving them in financial and emotional ruin. But there was more. The report went deeper, into a sealed juvenile record. At 17, Jonathan Hemlock had been a suspect in the disappearance of a high school girlfriend from a wealthy family. The case had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the file was filled with unsettling interviews. Friends described him as possessive, manipulative, with a terrifying temper that he kept hidden beneath a veneer of charm. "He's not just a con man," David said, his voice grim over the speakerphone. "He's a predator, and he's escalating." His last victim, a widow in Palm Beach, lost everything. She tried to go to the police, but he had entangled her in so many questionable financial maneuvers that she was afraid of being implicated herself. She had an accident, a fall down a flight of stairs. She's been in a coma for 6 months. Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Evelyn, who was watching the screen with a solemn, unnerving calmness, as if this were just a confirmation of what she already knew. Eleanor's face was hard, carved from granite. The loneliness that had made her vulnerable was gone, burned away by a cold, righteous anger. This man had not just tried to steal her money. He had preyed on her humanity. He had used her need for companionship as a weapon against her. And he had almost succeeded. He is still in the city, David continued. We have him under surveillance. He's at a bar across the street from the hotel. What are your instructions, Mrs. Chun? Eleanor was silent for a long moment. She could have him arrested. The evidence David had compiled was more than enough. But a quiet, public arrest felt insufficient. It felt like a legal transaction, not justice. This man had humiliated her, had threatened her sense of safety in the world. He had tried to make a fool of her. He had underestimated her. That was his fatal mistake. She thought of Michael Peterson, the silent guardian. He had not just defeated his enemies. He had outsmarted them. He had used their own momentum, their own arrogance, against them. A plan began to form in her mind. A plan of beautiful, cold precision. David, she said, her voice steady. I do not want him arrested. Not yet. I want you to continue surveillance. I want to know his every move. And I want you to arrange something for me. I need a team, the best private security you can find. And I need a location. A place where we can have a final meeting. On my terms. She looked from the screen to Evelyn. He thinks this is over, she said, a dangerous glint in her eye. He thinks he can just disappear and find his next victim. But he is wrong. He came into my world. He will not leave it until I permit him to. Later that evening, Laura sat by her mother's bedside in the new hospital. The room was private, spacious, and filled with the quiet hum of advanced medical technology. A team of specialists had already run a new series of tests, their manner calm, competent, and reassuring. For the first time in months, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in Laura's heart. Eleanor had arranged for a car to take her there and wait for as long as she needed. She had insisted. Family is everything, she had said. Go. Be with your mother. Laura held her mother's frail, sleeping hand. She thought about the impossible turn her life had taken. She thought about Evelyn, her daughter, her strange, wonderful, terrifyingly perceptive daughter. She had always known Evelyn was special, but she had never understood how. Now, she was beginning to see. It wasn't just intelligence. It was a legacy, a gift passed down from a grandfather she had never met. A quiet courage that saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it should be. A nurse came in to check the monitors. Your mother is responding well to the new treatment protocol, she said with a warm smile. Dr. Matthews is very optimistic. Tears streamed down Laura's face once more, but this time, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of a dam breaking, of a pressure finally released. She was safe. Her mother was safe. Her daughter had saved them all. She looked out the hospital window at the glittering city lights, a world that had once seemed so hostile and indifferent. And for the first time, she felt like she might just have a place in it after all. The location Eleanor chose was a place of ghosts. It was a cavernous, long-abandoned textile warehouse on the industrial waterfront, miles from the glittering spire of the Grand Majestic Hotel. This was where her empire had begun, decades ago. She had arrived in this country with nothing but a handful of dollars and an encyclopedic knowledge of silk weaving, a skill learned at her mother's knee in that faraway mountain village. This brick-and-steel shell was the first property she had ever bought. It was here, amidst the clatter of second-hand looms and the tireless work of other immigrants, that she had woven her future. The building had been slated for demolition for years, a relic of a bygone era. Now, it served a new purpose. At Eleanor's command, David's team had swept through it. They didn't renovate it, they prepared it. The vast, dusty space was left mostly empty, save for a single, heavy oak table and 3 chairs placed directly under a massive, grime-covered skylight. The afternoon sun cut through the haze of dust, sending a solitary beam of light down, like a spotlight on a stage. Hidden cameras and microphones were installed, their lenses like tiny, unblinking eyes in the shadows. The bait for the trap was simple, elegant, and perfectly tailored to her prey. She sent Gregory a single, untraceable text message, routed through a series of encrypted servers. You have caused me considerable embarrassment. I am prepared to offer you a one-time settlement of $5 million to disappear from my life permanently. A non-disclosure agreement will be required. Come alone. An address will follow. It was a masterstroke of psychology. The offer was large enough to be irresistible to a man of his greed. But it was also small enough, in the context of her vast fortune, to seem like a nuisance payment, a sum she would willingly part with to avoid a scandal. It played directly into his perception of her as a weak, foolish old woman, terrified of public humiliation. In his cheap motel room, surrounded by takeout containers and the stale smell of fear, Gregory, or Jonathan Hemlock, as he now thought of himself, read the message. His first reaction was suspicion, but greed quickly overpowered it. $5 million. It wasn't the $100 million prize he had been aiming for, but it was a handsome consolation. It was enough to set himself up again, create a new identity, find a new mark. He scoffed. She was scared. The little girl had spooked her, but she didn't have any real proof. Otherwise, the police would be at his door. This was a payoff. She was trying to buy his silence. The arrogance that was his defining trait swelled in his chest. He saw himself walking in, signing a piece of paper, and walking out with a briefcase full of money. He might even be able to intimidate her into giving him more. Yes, he thought, a flicker of his old charm returning. He could still turn this around. He could play the wounded lover, hint at a broken heart, perhaps even shed a tear. He had done it before. It almost always worked. An hour later, a second text arrived with the address. A derelict warehouse by the docks. Of course, a neutral, private location. It made perfect sense. He put on his most expensive suit, the armor of his false identity. He checked his reflection, practicing the sorrowful, betrayed smile he had perfected over the years. He was ready for his final performance. The taxi dropped him off at the address. The area was a wasteland of decaying industrial buildings and weed-choked lots. The warehouse loomed before him, its windows like vacant eyes. A single, large metal door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The vastness of the space hit him first. It was cold, and his footsteps echoed unnervingly in the silence. Then he saw her. Eleanor Chun was sitting at the oak table in the single shaft of light. She was not dressed in soft cashmere or elegant silk. She wore a simple, dark, high-collared dress. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back severely, and her face, unadorned by makeup, looked as if it were carved from ivory. She was not the lonely, vulnerable widow he had courted. She was someone else entirely. A queen. A judge. He felt a prickle of unease. He had expected to see her lawyers, a briefcase, papers ready to be signed. But the table was bare except for a single, old, black-and-white photograph. "Gregory," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. It was not the soft, warm voice he was used to. It was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. Or should I say, Jonathan? I must confess, I prefer your real name. It has a certain reptilian honesty to it. His blood ran cold. The charming smile he had prepared died on his lips. "Eleanor, I don't know what you're talking about. I came here in good faith, too." "You came here out of greed," she cut him off. "The same greed that has guided every action of your pathetic, parasitic life. Did you really think I was so foolish? So blinded by your cheap theatrics that I would not look into the man I was considering marrying?" She stood up slowly. "I built an empire from nothing in this city, Jonathan. I have faced down corporate raiders, hostile governments, and treacherous business partners. I have survived liars, cheats, and thieves far more sophisticated than you. You were an amateur, a common, vulgar predator. And I am ashamed. Ashamed that my loneliness made me blind to you for even a moment." He started to back away, his mind racing, searching for an exit, an escape route. "This is crazy. You're crazy." "Am I?" Eleanor's voice rose, filled with a righteous fury that seemed to shake the very dust from the rafters. Was Mrs. Du Bois in Palm Beach crazy? Or the Countess di Varese in Italy? Or the businesswoman in Chicago? I know all their names, Jonathan. I know all of your names, too. From the deep shadows behind Eleanor, two figures stepped forward into the light. It was Laura and Evelyn. Laura's face was no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet, resolute strength. Evelyn stood beside her, her gaze fixed on Jonathan, her expression unreadable but for the unwavering certainty in her eyes. Jonathan stared at the child. the source of his ruin, the impossible little girl who had seen right through him. You, he snarled, his mask of civility finally dropping away completely, revealing the ugly, violent creature beneath. This is your fault. No, Eleanor said, stepping between him and the girl. This is your fault. You did this. You chose this path. And now, you will face the consequences. Jonathan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. What are you going to do, old woman? Call the police? We both know that will create a scandal you don't want. Your name will be dragged through the mud. You still don't understand, do you? Eleanor said with a shake of her head. You still think I care about such things? My reputation, my public image, those are things for the world you inhabit. A world of surfaces and lies. But I come from a different world. A world where honor and justice are all that matter. She picked up the old photograph from the table. It was a faded image of a young American soldier with kind eyes, surrounded by a group of smiling Chinese villagers. A young girl, no older than Evelyn, was holding the soldier's hand. This was my village, Eleanor said, her voice softening with memory. This was my father. And this little girl, this was me. The man in this photograph, Sergeant Michael Peterson, saved us. He taught us that you do not stand by and allow evil to flourish. You confront it. You root it out. His granddaughter reminded me of that lesson. She looked past him, towards the darkened corners of the warehouse. You are right. I am not going to call the police. That would be too simple, too clean. No, Jonathan. For you, I have planned something far more appropriate. On her signal, the large metal door behind Jonathan slammed shut with a deafening, final boom. From all around him, out of the shadows, figures emerged. They were not police officers in uniform. They were grim-faced men, men who had been victims of his scams. A ruined investor from his early days. The son of a woman who had lost her home. The brother of the widow in Palm Beach. They had been flown in by Eleanor, their silence and cooperation bought with the promise of restitution, and something more valuable, the chance to face the man who had destroyed their lives. Jonathan Hemlock was trapped. The hunter was now the prey. There were no cameras, no lawyers, no police. Only the ghosts he had created, brought back to haunt him in the cavernous, silent warehouse where Eleanor Chun had first learned how to build a world, and now, how to tear one down. Jonathan Hemlock's world shrank to the dimensions of the oak table and the circle of grim-faced men who surrounded him. The vast, shadowy warehouse felt claustrophobic, the air thick with a silent, simmering rage. These were not hired thugs. Their eyes held no cold professionalism. They held something far worse, memory. He saw the ghosts of his past, made flesh. An older man, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of physical labor, stepped forward. My name is Arthur Benson, he said, his voice raspy. My wife was Sarah. You called yourself Robert. You told her you were investing her retirement savings in a can't-miss real estate deal. She worked for 40 years as a nurse. That money was all she had. When it was gone, and you were gone, the shame, it broke her. She died of a heart attack 6 months later. Her doctor said it was from stress. He held up a small, worn photograph of a smiling woman. I just wanted you to see her face again. Another man, younger, his face tight with anger, pointed a shaking finger at Jonathan. My mother is in a coma because of you. You pushed her. My sister saw you. She was too scared to come forward. She's not scared anymore. One by one, they spoke. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply testified. Each story was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his manufactured identity. They spoke of stolen inheritances, of life savings vanished, of homes lost, of trust shattered so completely it had led to illness and despair. They were not just talking about money. They were talking about the theft of their lives, their pasts, and their futures. Jonathan, the master of words, the weaver of lies, found he had nothing to say. His charm was a useless currency here. His practiced apologies would be gasoline on this fire. For the first time in his life, he was utterly powerless. He was not a character in a story he was writing. He was a bug pinned to a board. He looked at Eleanor, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He saw no mercy there, only a profound, historical coldness. She was not enjoying this. Her expression was one of grim necessity, of a surgeon excising a cancer. Laura stood holding Evelyn's hand, her knuckles white. She was terrified, but she did not look away. She needed to see this. She needed to see the monster who had almost entered their lives be stripped of his power. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. The world had teeth, and she was finally seeing what it took to pull them. Evelyn watched, her expression unchanging. She was not afraid. She was observing, learning, understanding. She was seeing the abstract concepts her grandfather had taught her: justice, consequence, honor, play out in a stark and brutal reality. When the last man had spoken, a heavy silence descended upon the warehouse. All that could be heard was Jonathan's ragged breathing. "This is your reckoning, Jonathan," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the silence. "This is the balance sheet of your life, the sum of all your choices." She gestured to a briefcase that one of David's men, previously unseen in the shadows, placed upon the table. She opened it. It was not filled with money. It was filled with files, each one thick with evidence. "The authorities have been given an anonymous tip," she explained calmly. "They have been directed to a storage locker you keep under a false name. In it, they will find documents, passports, and financial records detailing every crime you have committed for the past 20 years. The evidence is overwhelming. You will be arrested. You will be convicted. You will die in prison. There is no doubt of this." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "However, I am offering you an alternative. Not because you deserve it, but because these people," she gestured to the circle of men, "deserve to have their lives back. And because I have no wish for my name to be associated with yours in the public record." She slid a single sheet of paper and a pen across the table. "This is a confession. You will sign it. It details everything. It also contains a full power of attorney, granting my associates the right to liquidate every hidden asset you have. Every offshore account, every shell corporation. We know where they are. We will drain them. The money will be used to repay your victims, with interest. And what happens to me?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You will be given a new identity. A real one this time. No lies. You will be given a bus ticket to a small, remote town in the middle of the country where you will work a manual labor job for the rest of your life. You will have a small apartment. You will earn a minimum wage. You will be nobody, and you will be watched. If you ever deviate from this path, if you ever try to contact anyone from your past, if you ever so much as tell a single lie to get out of a day's work, your confession will be delivered to the FBI. You will not be given a second chance." It was a choice between a cage of steel and a cage of absolute obscurity. A choice between a quick death of his life as he knew it and a slow one. He stared at the paper, then at the faces around him. He saw no escape. He had been so thoroughly, so completely outmaneuvered. His shoulders slumped. The last of his arrogance, his defiance, crumbled into dust. He was a hollow man, and the emptiness was finally, crushingly apparent. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed his name, his real name, at the bottom of the page. Eleanor took the paper. She nodded to David's man, who escorted a now-broken Jonathan Hemlock out a side door, towards his new life of relentless, anonymous mediocrity. She then turned to the assembled men. "My associates will be in touch with each of you," she said, her voice now softer, filled with a quiet empathy. "You will be made whole. I cannot give you back the time you have lost, or the trust he stole, but I can give you back your security. I can give you a fresh start." One by one, the men came forward. They didn't thank her with loud words. They did it with a nod of the head, a look of profound, weary gratitude in their eyes. They were ghosts no longer. As the last man left, the warehouse fell silent once more. The shaft of light from the skylight had moved, and the table was now in shadow. The play was over. Eleanor, Laura, and Evelyn walked out of the warehouse and into the late afternoon sun. The air outside felt fresh and clean. Laura took a deep breath, as if she hadn't truly breathed in days. Eleanor looked down at Evelyn, who was squinting in the bright light. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you," she said. Evelyn looked up at her. "He would have been proud of you, too," she replied simply. A rare, genuine smile touched Eleanor Chen's lips. She had spent a lifetime building walls to protect her fortune. She had spent the past few days building them to protect her life. But now, in the company of this working-class woman and her extraordinary child, she felt a different kind of protection. It wasn't the cold security of wealth and power. It was the warmth of connection. A family. A black car, sleek and silent, pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door. "Come," Eleanor said, her hand resting gently on Laura's shoulder. "Let's go to the hospital." Let's go see your mother." As they drove away from the decaying waterfront, back towards the glittering city, it was clear that more than just a criminal had been dealt with. A new alliance had been forged. A lonely empress had found a new purpose. A struggling mother had found a new hope. And a little girl with the eyes of a silent guardian had shown them all that the quietest voice can speak the most powerful truth. 3 months later, a gentle autumn sun filtered through the large bay window of a comfortable, sunlit house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. The scent of baking bread and fresh paint hung in the air. This was Laura and Evelyn's new home. It was not a palace like Eleanor's suite, but to them, it was a kingdom. It was a place of safety and peace, bought and paid for by a woman who had become their unlikely benefactor and friend. Laura moved around the kitchen with a newfound lightness. The constant, crushing weight of fear and debt was gone. Her mother, whose laughter could now be heard from the sunroom where she sat doing a crossword puzzle, had responded remarkably to the new treatment. The prognosis was excellent. The doctors called it a medical miracle. Laura knew it was a miracle of a different kind, a miracle born from a whisper in a forgotten language. She was no longer a maid. Eleanor, recognizing Laura's quiet competence and fierce loyalty, had offered her a position managing a new charitable foundation she had established. The foundation's purpose was twofold: to provide financial and medical assistance to families bankrupted by illness, and to fund educational programs for gifted children from low-income backgrounds. Laura, who had navigated the labyrinth of the healthcare and social services systems for years out of sheer necessity, was uniquely qualified for the role. She had found her calling not in scrubbing the floors of the wealthy, but in lifting up those who had been knocked down by life. Evelyn was thriving. She was enrolled in a special school that challenged her remarkable mind, a place where her deep questions and unusual insights were celebrated, not seen as strange. But the new environment hadn't changed her. She was still the same quiet, observant girl. She still preferred the company of her history books to loud parties. She still saw the world with the clear, unsparing eyes of her grandfather. Eleanor was a frequent visitor to their new home. She would arrive in her chauffeured car, but she would leave her corporate armor at the door. With them, she was not Mrs. Chun, the billionaire titan of industry. She was Eleanor, a friend. She would sit in the kitchen with Laura, sipping tea and talking for hours, not about stock prices or acquisitions, but about their lives, their hopes, their children. She found a simple, profound joy in these moments, a joy her vast wealth had never been able to buy. She had found a new family. In Laura, she saw the resilience of the women she had grown up with. And in Evelyn, she saw not only the legacy of the man who had saved her village, but also the future. A future guided by wisdom, not just by wealth. One crisp Saturday afternoon, the three of them were in the living room. Laura was looking over some case files for the foundation. Evelyn was on the floor, meticulously sketching a detailed map of ancient battlefields. Eleanor was watching her, a fond, thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," Eleanor said softly, "I have been thinking about your grandfather, about what he did. He was one man, a foreigner in a strange land. He could have just followed his orders, kept his head down, and survived. But he didn't. He chose to see the people around him not as strangers, but as human beings. He chose to get involved. He chose to risk everything for people he didn't even know." She looked at Evelyn, her gaze intense. "That is what you did, Evelyn. You saw me. Not my money, not my name. You saw a woman who was in danger, and you chose to speak. You risked your mother's job, your own safety, to help a stranger." Evelyn looked up from her drawing, her blue eyes serious. "Grandpa said we're all connected," she said. "He said what happens to one person, even someone far away, happens to all of us. He said courage is just remembering that." The simple, profound truth of her words hung in the quiet room. Laura looked up from her work, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. She had spent so much of her life feeling small and powerless, a victim of circumstance. But her daughter had taught her that power wasn't about money or status. It was about seeing the truth and having the courage to speak it. Later that week, Eleanor held the first official fundraising gala for her new foundation. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Majestic Hotel, the very place where this strange journey had begun. The room was filled with the city's wealthiest and most influential people. Eleanor, looking regal in a gown of deep sapphire blue, stood at the podium. She did not speak of balance sheets or tax incentives. She told a story. She spoke of a small village in the mountains of China. She spoke of a young American soldier called the Silent Guardian. She spoke of the courage of ordinary people in the face of extraordinary evil. Then, she looked towards the side of the stage, where Laura and Evelyn were standing. "We often look for heroes in grand places," she said, her voice resonating with a passion that captivated the audience. "On battlefields, in boardrooms, in the halls of power. But sometimes, heroes are found in the quietest places. Sometimes, they are a maid who works tirelessly to save her family. Sometimes, her eyes rested on Evelyn. They are a 12-year-old girl who sees the truth and is brave enough to whisper it. This foundation," she concluded, her voice thick with emotion, "is not just about writing checks. It is about listening to those whispers. It is about finding the heroes who live among us every day and giving them the support they need to change the world. It is built on the legacy of a silent guardian, and it is dedicated to his granddaughter, who has taught me that the greatest fortune one can have is a courageous heart." A wave of heartfelt applause filled the ballroom. Evelyn did not smile, but a deep, quiet light shone in her eyes. In that vast, glittering room, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, the richest person present was the little girl who had nothing but her grandfather's wisdom and the courage to use it. Long after the gala had ended, Evelyn stood with Eleanor on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city's endless sea of lights. "Do you think he's okay?" Evelyn asked quietly. "The bad man." Eleanor was silent for a moment, looking at the distant, anonymous glow of the suburbs. "He is where he needs to be, Evelyn," she said. "He is living a life without lies. For a man like him, that is the harshest prison of all. But it is also his only chance to find something real." She looked down at the child beside her. "You didn't just save me. You may have, in a strange way, saved him too." Evelyn nodded, accepting this. Her sense of justice was not about punishment. It was about balance, about things being put right. The story of the maid's daughter and the billionaire would never be public knowledge. It would become another one of the city's quiet, hidden histories. But its impact would ripple outwards, touching countless lives through the work of the foundation. It was a testament to the fact that the most significant changes in the world often begin not with a bang, but with a whisper, a warning, a quiet truth spoken in a forgotten language, heard by someone brave enough to listen. And in that listening, a whole world was saved. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.